Hey guys, this is Theuberelite, and this is my 2-week solo self-found hardcore Mayhem character that ended up being number 2 overall to get 100, as well as number 1 Necromancer. This character is a life-based Baron SRS character that surprisingly ended up with a ton of HP, even though I never got a Belly of the Beast or Comb's Heart. This character was very, very powerful, and I'm really happy about how it turned out. It also reminded me of a lot of old tricks, which I'm going to be going over in this video as well. I'll be going over the gear and the passives as well as a lot of the gem setups. This gear on this character didn't end up being fully optimized, but was really, really good enough to do any map up to T15, and probably could have done T16 bosses even. I've also rolled this character in beta a bit, and it remains largely unchanged other than that we can now get hybrid life plus armor rolls on gear and such, which means that the life pool can only go up in comparison to live. Anyways, hope you guys enjoy. The guide is going to be a little bit long, and I will work on a text guide, and hopefully that'll come soon. So obviously we should probably talk about the gear and why I decided to go Baron for an SRS build. Now, why would you want to go Baron for SRS? It's not just a good leveling helmet because of the +2 minion gems. It's not just meant to be used for zombies, because there is one line on there that makes this really good for SRS, which is the strength being added to minions. This not only means that they get additional life, which is, kind of irrelevant, but it means they also get extra damage, and quite a bit, because of the way that minion damage scales, which I'll talk about in another video. We only have 200% additive minion damage based off of our tree and based off of the minion damage support. However, we're actually getting even more than that because of the strength from Baron. We're getting a lot of extra melee physical damage, which adds on top of that, and increases our damage by almost 40%, maybe even more than that. You can import my character into Path of Building and take off Baron to see what I'm talking about if you wish. Obviously, this makes our gearing focused heavily around strength. I try to get strength on any piece that I can. Grip of the Council, we're obviously really good because it gains physical damage as extra cold damage, has strength bonus, also gives our minions cold res, which actually ended up being quite useful. And obviously it has some cold res and life and all of that. Our staff is just a +2 fire gem staff with Vegan level 7 craft for level 1 blood magic. You can use a 5-link staff and cast off of mana and use clarity instead of haste early on until you get a 6-link where you put in the blood magic gem. And then once you have Vegan level 7 craft, you can put on the level 1 blood magic, and yeah. Just make sure you don't have any damage to fire or cold to spells on your staff so that you can use equilibrium properly. Ideally, you want a +3 fire staff, but crafting that is quite a process, and you need a lot of level 8 masters and a lot of exalts in order to do that. There's a lot of videos on how to craft that, so I won't explain it here. We decided to go for Ascendancy because it dropped and solved all of our int and dex problems, and meant that we could focus on primarily resistances and life in our jewel sockets, or minion damage in our jewel sockets. And this ends up being quite useful for making gearing easier because you don't have to worry about stats so much. It also enables the bronze jewel, which isn't necessary, but was kind of nice, and I just kind of threw it in as a random jewel later on in the race. The rings are basically just life and strength and resistances. I had dex on this ring because I was using it before I got Ascendancy, and it solved my dex problems. But the ideal is that you have minion speed crafted rings, so you don't have to use the minion speed gem, or you can just get a crapload of minion speed just to make your SRS ridiculously fast and just zoom from pack to pack super quickly, if you wish. The chest is obviously just strength, life, and resistances. We get a little bit of armor wherever we can, simply because it's nice against those smaller hits, against things like Chimerals. Again, life, strength, resistances. You can go with a leather belt instead of a heavy belt. You'll only get a small damage penalty for a little bit of extra life. That's entirely up to you. And for this race, I decided to go for the Calm's Roots. Now, the fourth line on Calm's Roots in the explicit, you cannot be slowed to below base speed, is very important here. This means that, unless under the effects of an acceleration shrine, temporal chains will have no effect on you, other than making buffs and debuffs last longer. Chilled Ground will have no effect on you, and Freeze will have no effect on you. This basically means that you don't have to have a freeze or chill immunity flask, and so you can make up for the move speed very easily with a flask of adrenaline and go a lot faster as if you had 30 movement speed boots as long as you have that adrenaline flask up. I also went with a silver flask, which meant I had a little bit of extra cast speed and attack speed and movement speed, basically because there was nothing better to use there. Since this also gives them Wavering Stance, we can't evade, so Stib Knights and Jade Flasks and things like that are kind of pointless. We end up going with the Granite and Basalt, simply for the extra physical damage reduction. This gives us a fair amount of armor and quite a bit of physical damage reduction. We ended up replacing the Granite Flask for a Taste of Hate in maps where we felt like we wouldn't get shocked, basically in things that were like box maps. And also because box maps had a tendency to pop out porcupines from boxes, and we wanted all the fizz damage reduction we could get guaranteed. We ended up using a Divine Life Flask of Dowsing for the Ignite removal because of boxes as well. Because boxes ended up being some of the best experience we could get, you do end up getting ignited quite a bit, and having no Ignite on you to make sure you have as much regen as possible for SRS is quite nice. So I ended up going with the Ignite removal. Bleed removal and curse removal are very obvious. You kind of need those on just about every build. For the amulet, you could replace it with something like this, which has about 90 strength and a crapload of life. You obviously have to make up for the resistances and other stats that you're missing still. Or you could craft res on if you have a suffix free. But because I found Astromentus, I never ended up using this because I found this really late into the race. Alternatives to boots, you could use something like Alberon's Warpath for the % strength boost, or you could just use normal rare boots. The other gearing thing to talk about is the Dancing Dervish setup, which I'll go over now in Dried Lake. One of the tricks I used while I was playing this build was I got Rampage through Dancing Dervish. Now, I actually linked this, but this is entirely unnecessary to link it, and I'll show you why. All you need to do with Dancing Dervish is have SRS be in the same socket as whatever SRS gem you're using in your main weapon, so that when you cast with your main weapon and then weapon swap, the SRS won't go away. They don't even have to be the same level SRS or anything. They just have to be in the same socket. So what this means is that you can cast SRS with your main weapon, swap over to the Dancing Dervish until you get a kill or two, and then swap back before you get your first Rampage streak. And because you don't have Dancing Dervish on when you start the Rampage streak, you won't have your weapon disabled. If your weapon does end up disabled, you will have to wait for your Rampage streak to end, or you will have to leave and rejoin the map in order to reactivate your weapon. The reason for Rampage is it does add us some extra minion damage and extra minion speed, as well as giving us some speed and some procs at different Rampage kill streaks that allowed us to clear a lot faster. One of the notables was the 800 kill streak, or 850, or somewhere around there, where you start pulsing like we are now, except every time it hits a mob, it emits a pulse from them as well, which will chain through other mobs as well. And this happens a whole lot and allows us to run through the map for quite some time without doing anything except just running by mobs and clicking boxes, and it'll clear the entire packs for us. This is quite useful in a race, as you can imagine. This actually isn't necessary, but it definitely added a whole lot to our clear speed. As for the passives, We obviously want to get minion damage still wherever we can. We're not just going to be purely based off of strength. And we obviously go with the Necromancer Ascendancy. So let's go over the Ascendancy first. The first thing you want to do on any Necromancer build, just about, I can't think of an exception to this, is you want to get Mistress of Sacrifice. This is always your first Ascendancy. It gives you so much clear speed. It is honestly one of the biggest power spikes you can get by completing normal lab in the game, in my opinion. The second Ascendancy you can get is either between Commander of Darkness and Spirit Eater. I personally prefer Commander of Darkness because it allows you to start gearing around the plus 20% to all elemental resistance. And it also gives you some extra cast speed. And the auras actually do scale with aura effect. And so that's another reason we end up getting aura effect where we can, because it does increase the damage, attack, and cast speed that we get from this node. After that, you end up getting Spirit Eater purely for damage purposes. It also gives you some extra cast speed every time you use Flesh Offering recently, and it also gives you some extra Desecrate Corpses, which makes your Flesh Offering last a little bit longer while you're still self-casting Desecrate. After that, the last one I did for Uber Lab was Beacon of Corruption. You don't need to get Beacon of Corruption. The better damage option is probably the other minion damages and life, although you do get some extra life from the Baron Helmet, from the strength, and obviously from the affix for the increased minion life. And the Chaos Clouds do alright damage, and we don't care about the Chaos damage here. But most of the reason that I got this is actually simply for the Chaos resistance when I had to run breaches, and so I didn't have to worry as much about Chila breaches. This actually probably saved me a couple times. Coming out of the tree, we obviously don't care about any of the spell damage, and we don't really need cast speed, so we come out of the int. Not only because we don't care about that, but because of the efficient training jewel, allowing us to convert all of this int into strength. This efficient training jewel is actually giving us 113 strength, 90 of which is just converted from int, and 23 from the jewel itself. We go out the top here through the minion damage. Don't actually take this life node, it's not useful. And we get the Crow Preparation for some extra resistances later on. It also gives us some extra int to help our int situation. In the beta, the Heart and Soul cluster was moved over here. You would end up getting this as well in the beta because it has been moved to a spot where it is more easily accessible. We end up going into the Templar through the top because the minion regen is quite useful, and Herd the Flock is actually very, very useful early on. You don't actually need it fully once you have a high enough level SRS, but it is quite useful for a very long time, and I definitely noticed the difference when I had the node and when I didn't. We end up getting Elemental Equilibrium because Elemental Equilibrium doesn't apply to minion hits, it only applies to our hits, which means we can use Ball Lightning to buff our minions' fire and cold damage, and since our minions aren't doing any lightning damage, we don't care that the mobs get increased resistance to lightning. This is also why you don't want to get cold damage or fire damage to spells on your staff, because that would actually make your Ball Lightning increase the resistance of those damage types. We obviously get more minion damage wherever we can. If you're leveling as SRS, once you get these first two minion damage nodes, you want to rush for the skill duration as soon as possible. This skill duration is very important to making SRS feel good on top of the Mistress of Sacrifice nodes, and these will give you all the duration you need for SRS. We don't end up getting the second duration cluster, although there is a version of this build, which I will put in the description, that does get the increased skill duration, which is pretty nice, simply just for the Vow Haste and the extra Flesh Offering duration. But we choose to go through the left side of the tree, which ends up being a little bit more tanky, and also has better times dealing with mana costs as well as life costs. We end up getting the Tireless cluster, which is actually quite useful. I actually underrated this cluster when I first thought of the build, and ended up getting it later on, and stuck with it ever since then because of the 15 total reduced mana cost of skills. This actually helped a lot with sustaining Summon Raging Spirit life costs, as well as the few skills that we do use on our mana become even easier to cast. We still get these aura nodes because they still obviously help boost our hatred even further, help boost Commander of Darkness, and they also give some increased area effect of aura skills. A lot of the reason people wrote off Baron for a long time is because the leadership cluster gave so much increased area of effect for auras that if you don't have it, most of your minions aren't even going to be affected by your auras half the time. However, I think a lot of people overlooked that there is actually an aura cluster down in the duelist area called Champion of the Cause, which gives almost as much. Not as much, but very, very close. And this cluster is very, very nice for a Baron SRS build. We obviously go down the left side of the tree. We get a lot of strength through this way, as well as a lot of life. We go into the Marauder tree, which gives us a whole bunch of regen and a whole bunch of strength. And obviously, just lots of life in the Marauder tree. We end up going into the Duelist area. You don't really have to do this, but the regen is actually pretty nice, as well as the extra bit of dex. For the jewels, since I ended up switching to Ascendancy, I ended up focusing mostly on res for the jewels, and I didn't get a lot of minion damage on them. Ideally, you would want something like minion damage, although if you want to go super tank, you can go for life. And finding minion damage plus life jewels is pretty rough. I probably wouldn't try to focus on getting that too much, because by the time you have all of your jewel sockets filled with minion damage, life, resistance jewels, you're probably going to be 100. Or you're going to have spent so much time flipping that you're probably a month into the league and you're level like 95 or something. It's nice if you can get that though. But mostly just focused on resistance and minion damage. 2 or 3 stats is all you need. I ended up getting a broad jewel once I put on Astromentis, just simply for a little bit of extra strength and life bonus. And because I wanted to see my life go over 9k or push to 9k as close as possible. That's really about it. The tree is very, very straightforward because of you just pretty much stacking strength for the most part after you have the easy to reach minion damage nodes for the most part. We ended up skipping out on this minion damage up here simply because it cost too many points to get for my liking, and I'd rather just have more life. I already had enough damage at this point, so yeah. Now the first thing we want to talk about for the links is obviously SRS. The first 2 links you want to have on SRS is minion damage and melee splash, and you can start using SRS the moment you hit level 8 with this. Especially if you have a +1 fire, wand, or a scepter. These 2 links will be able to clear content. It may feel a little clunky until you have Mistress of Sacrifice from the Ascendancy, but yeah. The 4th link you want when you get a +1 minion helmet is either melee physical or minion speed, or you can just use both and then swap in minion damage whenever you feel like you need the damage for a boss. The 5th link is whatever you omitted from those. So your 5 links would be minion damage, melee fizz, melee splash, and minion speed in ideally a 5 link +2 fire staff. The 6th link, if you don't have Vegan 7 or don't have access to a Vegan 7 at that point, you'll want to add in Blood Magic Gem. If you have the Blood Magic Craft at that point, you will probably want to run Elemental Focus for your 6th link until you have a level 3 Empower. In the beta, you will probably run Elemental Damage to attacks, and then for anything you want to do with bosses, you swap out Minion Speed for the Elemental Focus Gem, simply for the single target. Empower level 3 is going to be better than both either Elemental Focus or Elemental Damage with attacks if you have a +3 staff, or Empower 4 if you have a +2 staff. Although I would probably use Empower 3 even over Elemental Focus because the chill is actually quite noticeable. For other links, we had to be a little bit creative with this. We have Generosity Hatred, which is pretty key. This gives us a lot of cold damage, and you run this as soon as possible, simply because it's a pretty massive damage boost to your SRS, since they are 100% Fizz baseline. We have Stone Golem and Decoy Totem unlinked, and the Stone Golem actually does alright damage and is a good other target. The Decoy Totem is one of the reasons I don't run zombies, is because it's such an easy target to just place down and have distract everything because it taunts, that I didn't really see the point in running something else other than the Decoy Totem. We got a little creative with our cast on damage taken setup. We have cast on damage taken, increased duration of Mortal Call, but we also have 2 other gems in this link. And this is set up so that these gems are not affected by the cast on damage taken, but are still affected by the increased duration. We have Flesh Offering at level 20, which means that our level 3 cast on damage taken can't ever cast it, which means we can still self-cast ourselves. And we also have Val Haste, which is fairly obvious, I think. We have Flame Dash simply for getting over ledges, where it's faster to jump over them instead of walking around. Obviously, we need a movement skill for that, and we only really need 1 socket for that. We have Haste Gem and an Unset Ring, simply for, well, we didn't have room for it anywhere else efficiently when we wanted to run this Ball Lightning setup, which is very nice. This Ball Lightning setup I used was GMP Ball Lightning, which covers a crap ton of area in the direction that we cast it in, and we have it linked to Curse on Hit and Feeble. You can choose the curse to use. You can use Temp Chains just for the slow, or you could use Elemental Weakness for the best damage curse you can get. You could also run another Unset Ring for a level 1 Clarity to get another Commander of Darkness boost if you like. And it also gives you a little bit of extra regen potentially to help you with your mana costs. I never got to try this personally, but I could see it working pretty well. And obviously, you'll have a lot more room to work with gems if you aren't using Calm's Roots, but that's entirely up to you. This build ended up being really good and only looks like it's going to get better with the 3.0 release. Obviously this is subject to change and who knows what other things will come, but I definitely really enjoyed it and I'm definitely still enjoying it in beta as a starter character. Obviously the Baron could go up in price or rarity as well, which could make the build more expensive too. But who knows at this point. There's still the other options of CI SRS and low life SRS, and by no means is Baron absolutely 100% the best. The best SRS build is going to be subjective, and there is no real clear winner in what the best build is, because you have to factor in so many things. And yes, I'm saying a CI build is not dead in beta. I'm saying that CI SRS will actually work in 3.0 at this point. Anyways, really hope you guys enjoyed. I know this was a really long video, but I had a lot of things to explain when it came to this build, because there was a lot of things that I ended up doing over the course of time while playing this in Mayhem. I will be making a text guide for this, as I said earlier in the video. There are some things I didn't even go over in the video that I still want to cover, and I know there's a lot of information in this video to soak up, so perhaps a text guide will be easier for some people. But I didn't want the video to end up being an hour long, especially since I'm kind of recording some of this footage a little bit late into the Mayhem League and it's about to end, so oops. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. This is the Theuberelite signing off. Feel free to follow me on Twitch and subscribe on YouTube for more videos. I'll see you guys later.